So people will probably file in a little bit. My name is Donald Robertson. I'm the Copyright and Licensing Associate for the Free Software Foundation. I've been there for about 8 years. Just a heads up, the talk is being recorded, and I'm going to open it up for questions at the end. So if you don't want to be recorded, you'll have to come see me down at the booth later, because apparently the place is mic'd up, and it's going to be apparently posted on YouTube, from what I understand. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we do at the FSF. It's a small fraction of all the things that we end up doing at the FSF. We're a small organization. There's only about 12 people. And I'm going to be talking about some of the work that two of us do at the FSF in the Licensing Compliance Lab. So the Compliance Lab is really just two people at the FSF. It's myself and my associate Joshua Gay. And we've got a whole bunch of duties involved in that. We are the guys who handle the GPL compliance work for the FSF. We answer questions from the community about licensing, along with help from volunteers. We have a very nice volunteer team that helps us to be able to keep up with the flood of people who want to know whether they can sell GPL software or not. It's our most favorite question. We also maintain certification and verification programs, so the Endorsed Distro program at the FSF, where we say that this is a fully free operating system, such as Triskel, GNU Linux. Josh and I are the ones who handle that. We also handle the Respects Your Freedom program, which was launched just a few years ago for endorsing hardware that actually comes with nothing but free software on it, so that you know when you buy from this company that this product will come to you with absolute freedom. It's very cool. We've recently been able to endorse several laptops, so you can actually have a fully free computing environment the first time, where it's pretty much just put in your credit card and you have it, and there it is. And it's a very cool thing to come about. We also publish articles and educational materials, so we have tons of resources through GNU.org and FSF.org for how licensing works, our opinions on licensing related issues, like whether two licenses are compatible with one another, whether a particular thing is a GPL violation. So that's a whole big chunk of what we do. But really what all of these different items kind of boil down to is communication with several different groups. So obviously, we spend a lot of time communicating with the community. People come to us for answers to their questions because they care about free software and they want to make sure that they're doing their compliance correctly, or they're worried that someone else is not doing compliance correctly and they want to make sure that that they're sharing the source appropriately. We also, publishing our articles and educational materials. That's people that are our friends and members that come about because they care about free software and they want to know more. We also spend time communicating with organizations that are kind of not really in our community, which can sometimes involve things like a GPL violation. The way that we handle compliance at the FSF is we treat it like anything else as an educational opportunity. It's an opportunity to say, hey, you've made a mistake, but there's a very simple way to fix this whole process. And so as long as you can work with us, we can all sit down together at the table, learn how compliance works, and get on the right path. That also involves, maybe someone who's not violating on an FSF copyrighted work, but is doing something else that's damaging to software freedom. We do campaigns, actions, and letter writing, and just publicly documenting issues with other bad actors that are kind of outside the community, but that are affecting software freedom. So out of all those things boiling down to finally communicating with the government. That's what the focus of the talk here is today. So the items I'm going to be talking about compose essentially part-time of two people's part-time work of what we're able to get done doing it with the limited resources that we have here at the FSF. So I want you to keep that in mind, because the real message about this is that it's not just two guys doing all this work. It's hundreds and hundreds of people all around the world that make any of the stuff that I'm going to talk about happen. So the deal with the government is that they, unlike community members or bad actors on the periphery of our community, they play a really outsized role in how software freedom exists and how it can continue to exist. Obviously, they have the power to change the very laws that undergird the copyleft licenses like GPL and LGPL. The individual policies of agencies can also have a really big effect because, between their sourcing or what sort of rules they have for the contracts that they can take, it can affect whether entire bodies of software are free or not. And it can also negatively affect people who are not even working for the government and whether they're able to write software freely. So when it comes to communicating with the government, there's one of the main ways, it's kind of a terrible bullet point there, but one of the main ways we do is through comment periods that they open up. It's something that anybody can participate in. Government agencies put these things out all the time. They put it through the government register, which is supposed to be a public record, but you've probably never seen it before because it's kind of just hidden away in a corner of a website somewhere, and some volumes that they put into a library on a desk somewhere. But it's one of the big ways that you can actually directly communicate with government agencies about particular issues. So we're going to talk a fair amount about these public comment periods. Essentially, the way they work is the agency will say, "Hey, we're doing a study on something, or we're changing the rules about an item, and we'd love to hear from you in 30 days. Please write back to us real quick." And then you go through an entire process to this little formalized process of submitting some paperwork, and eventually, if you get it in on time and everything, they will be required to respond to that and publish your comment online. So we're going to talk a little bit about our trials and tribulations working through that sort of formalized system for being able to actually communicate with the government. Yes, so yeah, the process is kind of a pain in the butt. So a lot of times we will try and make it easy for other people to submit comments through us because really all that they need is they just need you to submit a document that they're going to read. But they have little special ways of making it more complicated than there really needs to be. And one of the biggest issues with it is that the main website that they use for the government is this regulations.gov website. And it is a really massive pile of proprietary JavaScript, which makes it difficult if you are a free software user who doesn't want to have proprietary software running on your computer to actually interact with them. That's an issue that come up many, many times throughout several of these actions I've been working on. So one of the big things that I've personally been working on at the FSF in terms of interacting with the government is the DMCA Anti-circumvention battle that's been going on for, about 15, 16 years now, I guess. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, you've probably heard of the takedown provisions where, if you post a video with music on YouTube, someone can take it down by posting a notice or something like that. But there's actually a whole lot involved in the DMCA. And one particular section that's really egregious is Section 1201, which handles DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. If you're not familiar, DRM it's that piece of crap that gets stuck on your software and your movies and books. It makes it so that you can't make backup copies or share with your friend or even modify your own copy if you want to remix it or do something like that on it. So media and software companies like to put this stuff on there because it gives them a really outsized level of control over the user. So even though you're allowed under fair use to remix a song, they like to put DRM on so that you're not able to do so unless you specifically go and work through them, even though this is a right that's guaranteed to you. Making backup copies is another thing that's been considered as fair use and that DRM can prevent. Sharing copies with your friend. Obviously, if you have a digital copy of something, back in the day, if you bought a record, you could just give that record to somebody else or sell it to somebody else. And DRM makes it so you can't give that item away or share it with somebody else. So it's very nasty stuff, and we've been fighting against it for a long time because obviously DRM can only work in any circumstance if people don't know how to get around it. So any DRM system is going to rely on being proprietary software in order to be effective, really. Although I guess there are some systems nowadays where they use these always online things that theoretically you could make it with free software and it would still create problems. But, so, DRM, it's very bad stuff. I think a lot of people know that already. But the DMCA makes it doubly so. So on top of presenting a technological barrier to your being able to access your own software and your own media, it creates a legal barrier. The simple act of cracking DRM is illegal under the DMCA. You can subject you to all kinds of civil penalties. Even though you haven't broken any rule or affected anybody else other than yourself, just the simple act of circumventing the DRM on, say, your vehicle, or perhaps the DRM that's built into your television. Simply to be able to maybe apply a bug fix or something, or change the functionality of your own device. You could end up getting a really hefty fine. And of course, it's not easy to circumvent DRM to begin with. That's its whole purpose. And so people will often try to, they'll generate tools or instructions on how to do it. And they'd like to be able to share those tools with other people so that they can control their own computing, so they can have control over the software that's on their own computers. But the DMCA, unfortunately, makes that a criminal act. That's something you can go to jail for. That's a really terrible situation where someone who's sharing, say, a crack for your PS3 to be able to re-enable the installing of GNU Linux on your PS3 device, simply sharing the tools for doing that can result in the FBI kicking in your door and arresting you, which is something that unfortunately happened to a teenager named George Hotz maybe 5-6 years ago. Ended up working out okay for him at the end. He ended up getting a job with Sony, I think. But he had his door kicked in, and that's not something that anyone should do simply for sharing software and information. So we've got this terrible system where DRM is bad, and trying to avoid its badness is illegal. But as some breadcrumbs thrown back, the DMCA sets out this triennial exemptions process. So the exemptions process is kind of a big clusterfuck. It's run by the Copyright Office, which is a department of the Library of Congress. Every 3 years, you get to submit for particularized exemptions. So, there's this one exemption that I really liked. It's just 2 guys, and they keep submitting it. It's a particular keyboard that they want to be able to circumvent the DRM on it because they want to be able to modify the software on this keyboard because they use it for recording, and it would be really cool if they could add more stuff to it. They always get turned down for their exemption, but so the exemptions have to be particularized. You can't just say, I want an exemption for all DRM, just exempt all DRM. And so you can, once you propose an exemption, it can then be fought. The people who don't want you to be able to control your own computing can write back and say, no, this exemption shouldn't happen. We shouldn't allow it to happen. Such as all the automotive associations all said, hey, no, you shouldn't be able to, modify your own car because, people traditionally don't modify cars. That's not like a thing people do, right? It's like, it's kind of sad because when I started at the FSF, that was the example we always gave to people of why free software should be a thing, because we'd say, it's just like your car. You're allowed to modify your car and open up the hood and do what you want. It'd be ridiculous if someone tried to oppose that. And now we're in the situation where instead of making software free like cars used to be, cars are now moving into that proprietary domain. So they get to say, no, we shouldn't have this exemption. So it's like a 6 months process of going back and forth with writing letters and filling out forms and all this other stuff. And then once you get your exemption passed, it lasts, another 2 years. You have to do it again because the exemptions expire every 3 years. So if you don't keep resubmitting the exemption and fighting back with the people who want to not grant the exemption, it goes away. And unfortunately, like I said before, we got the proprietary JS problem where if you want to submit comments to the Copyright Office, you got to go through regulations.gov. That's, I mean, for pretty much any agency, that's going to be the way that you do things online for submitting it to them. Some people will actually give you the option to mail it to them or do something else, so that you don't have to use proprietary software. So in this situation, what we did, in the past we had supported particular exemptions for high priority projects or things that we really felt that we needed to make sure that you could have an exemption on it. In this past year's round, instead we decided that we would just support every single exemption that somebody submitted. So we went through and filed 28 different forms explaining that DRM was terrible and that you shouldn't lock people down and restrict them, and supported every single exemption, even the guys with the keyboard, who are just the only two people that I think even own this keyboard. As part of each of our comments, we called for an end to the system, saying this is a terribly broken system. It's a really big pain to go through this exemptions process. It's unnecessary. We should just, if people are going to put DRM on their stuff, people should be allowed to break the DRM. That should just be the way the system works. In addition to that, because of the nature of how much of a pain it is to submit comments to the government, particularly if you don't want to use proprietary JavaScript, we also accepted comments from the community members. So we had people send their comments to us because we know how to just accept email or to put up a form that just clicks and it's just a form post page that doesn't take a bunch of proprietary JavaScript. We also included a letter along with our submission calling out on the problem of this proprietary JavaScript. Maybe I didn't discuss JavaScript too much before, but does everyone know what I'm saying when I say JavaScript? It's code that is delivered from a website onto your computer. So unlike some code that you might be interacting with someone else's computer, with JavaScript, it's actually all downloaded onto your machine. Even before I started working at the FSF, I installed plugins that blocked JavaScript because it's a major security vulnerability. You're essentially letting anybody run kind of crazy code on your machine. Web browsers can kind of be good about figuring out which is the malware and which is not, but they're not perfect. So JavaScript is some nasty stuff, but the way the web is now, a lot of it runs on JavaScript. So anytime you go to a website and it starts auto-playing a video and you're trying to close it off, that's the JavaScript on the website that's doing that. Or you go to read an article and it comes with the pop-up where it's like, hey, you need to subscribe or blah, 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 blah. That's the proprietary JavaScript. So it's kind of like, we used to have Flash do all that kind of annoying crap, and now JavaScript is kind of taking it over. It does also a lot of other good stuff, and you can make free JavaScript, but it's also, it's pretty nasty stuff. So as part of that process, after we submitted all our comments, supporting every exemption, including exemptions involved in vehicles, people wanting to be able to circumvent the DRM of vehicles for modification and research and security researchers. It turned out that the EPA was doing a little side program where they weren't publicly submitting comments, but they were going through another system to submit comments to the Copyright Office saying that you shouldn't grant any of the exemptions related to vehicles. Now, some of you may have heard that the EPA had a big piece of news later that fall, just a few months after that. In that it turned out that Volkswagen was violating emission standards by having their software pretend to be emissions compliant and then later chaining itself back to an uncompliant version. Now, the funny thing is that the people who eventually discovered the fraud at Volkswagen were security researchers who were stymied for quite a long time. I believe it was over 10 years, because these systems were encumbered by DRM, and it made their research difficult to figure out what exactly the software was doing under the hood. It's kind of ironic that EPA was at one point, in one hand, saying, no, you must not let people violate the DRM on their vehicles because then they'll violate emission standards, when it was the DRM that was protecting the actual people who were violating the emission standards. And the great thing is there's other car companies that it's now turning out that a whole bunch of people have been doing this with their software on their vehicles. So the Automotive Association of America is I'm not a big fan because of them opposing all the exemptions that people put together to hide this type of stuff.
When you say Automotive Association, you mean AAA?
No. It's. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. It's the manufacturer's one. So yeah, no, not AAA, not AAA. Yeah. Sorry. But so, aside from the fact that it's stupid for them to do this, it sets a really dangerous precedent. This is a situation where a government agency is saying, we need to have control over the software in your device because we want to enforce a law unrelated to copyright, right? So DRM has always been sold as digital rights management. We say restrictions because that's what it's really about, right? DRM is a way to control people. And this really shows that that's the case because emission standards have nothing to do with copyright. Why would you even inject emission standards into a question about, what is supposedly a copyright act? And it's a very scary future that we're going to be living in if we have government agencies, one, saying, all right, we're going to make software that can control what you do at home, wherever you are, and then we're going to make the act of even trying to modify that software or circumvent it illegal in itself. And it's something that we have to oppose at every stage, any agency that wants to do this. And unfortunately, so I'm going to talk about later, EPA is not the only government agency that suddenly realized, hey, this DRM stuff that we've been letting companies use to screw over people, this is great for us to be able to screw people over. So in EPA's case, we publicly called them out as DRM drones and had people messaging them and just letting the EPA know that they shouldn't be involved in the DMCA exemptions process and that they should have, they should allow people to crack the DRM and find out about this type of fraud that's going on right under their noses. So the end result of the exemptions process was we didn't get all the exemptions granted. The Copyright Office didn't come out and say, "Oh wow, you guys are brilliant. This is right. We should do this." Many exemptions were granted. Many were not granted. Definitely people who put in exemptions, such as the EFF, they should definitely feel proud of the things that they accomplished in getting those exemptions, because every exemption is helpful to the people who are able to use it. For us, it's a little disappointing, obviously, because we would want to end the whole process. But one thing that we felt that was pretty good to come out of it was, after the whole public comment period and exemptions process, a few senators requested a review of the entire DMCA process, or the anti-circumvention rules and exemption process. Specifically about, is this actually worthwhile? Is the exemptions process itself effective? And to what degree are people using the DMCA's anti-circumvention rules not to promote copyright, but to just unilaterally impose restrictions and conditions on users? Which was great. I was like, this is fantastic. This guy is a genius. He's been listening. So in response to that, they requested that the Copyright Office do another study about the effectiveness of all this. So in response to that, we put together a comment along with 1,200 co-signers calling just to end the DMCA. Like, get rid of it. It doesn't work in terms of the anti-circumvention rules. And so we wanted to help bring the voice of the whole community together and get it submitted in there so that they could understand what the problem was. But in this instance, the proprietary JavaScript actually blocked the way. The Copyright Office would refuse to accept our comments via the post or via email. And they simply said that they could not do it. They could make exceptions if you don't have a computer, but if you have a computer, you must use the proprietary JavaScript to submit the comment. So instead, we showed up at the office. We sent people to deliver the comment and all the co-signers at the Copyright Office down in D.C., which was a lot of fun and very cool. And so they came in, they weaseled through security. Security finally let them go and talk to the desk. And they took the comment, they stamped it, and apparently threw it in the circular file because they did not accept it. So they didn't, because it wasn't posted through their JavaScript website. So at the same time that this was going on, the day that they rejected our comments for not going through the JavaScript stuff, they announced a study on their infrastructure. They're going to be updating the infrastructure for the technical infrastructure for registering copyright and handling comments and all this stuff. And it was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. But unfortunately, it's so broken that we can't really tell them because they still require you to submit the work through this proprietary JavaScript website. So just to put in perspective, regulations.gov is 750,000 minified characters of JavaScript. In JavaScript, you don't compile the work, you get the code pretty straight up. But what they do is they minify it, so they take out all the extra spaces and all the extra characters on the variable names and shorten it all down so it's an unreadable, jumbled mess. So 750,000 characters is very, very large. It's actually bigger than GCC. Like when you get a binary of GCC, that's 600,000 characters. So you're talking about a website that accepts a form. I don't know if any of you guys are web developers. You probably know it doesn't take 750,000 lines of code to actually accept a form or just accept a text update. You could paste it in there or whatever. So it's kind of scary because regulations.gov is, yes, what was the question?
I'm just curious, does anybody have any indications of what it is they're doing? Is it just pure sloppiness?
No, that is the big question because regulations.gov is actually run by, I believe it's 8 different companies that have, I think it's 14 different domains that are all pumping JavaScript into this one thing. So we're not exactly sure what it is they're doing. But it's probably not something that you want happening on your computer.
It's not just the Web 2.0 content that somebody copied and pasted.
I don't believe so. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. I wasn't the person who did the study of what exactly is involved in it. But from what Josh told me, he's like, yeah, it's a bunch of nasty stuff. It's a huge jumbled mess of just all kinds of craziness. So it's not just, us sticking to our guns. It's legitimately like, no one should be going to this website. It's probably filled with malware of some form that's doing something on your computer that you really don't need or want. So yes, we submitted another comment to this study telling them that your infrastructure is so broken that we can't actually tell you how broken your infrastructure really is because you won't accept our comment. And they've also rejected that comment as well. We hope that they'll eventually start to listen, because there are other agencies that offer alternatives to using their terrible website. What was the question?
You're saying you're hoping that they'll eventually listen, but I think the whole point is they're trying not to listen. And you're basically feeding into their ability not to listen.
Yeah.
Because you're continuing to refuse to use their system, so you're a catch-22. From their perspective, the goal is accomplished.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And so, obviously a part of the process of dealing with these government agencies is we bring public attention to the problems with these issues about to people outside the government. With the EPA thing, we had people just pestering them on social media and sending emails and stuff like that. So we do a bunch of other actions aside from their normal standard procedures of commenting to try and get their attention and everything. Obviously, with the Copyright Office, we've had a lot of email back and forth with them. For them, it really is, I believe, just an issue of they don't know what proprietary JavaScript was. They're still trying to understand what exactly our issue even is with what we're trying to explain to them. They don't run the regulations.gov website. They get their information through it, like a lot of other government agencies, but they're not actually in charge of that section of it. The reality is that other agencies have other processes for accepting comments. Usually you can send an email or send a letter. It's just not the case with them. And it's just because we think it's just because they haven't addressed the issue before, because everybody else just puts it on the website because they don't care. Even other organizations that generally care about software freedom stuff will still submit their comments through it and everything. But that's not actually the end of the process, because we're still going on with all this stuff. There's more roundtable meetings, public events where we're going to send people to go and participate in these meetings. Copyright Office still has to publish the results of these studies, and we're hopeful that the next step in the process will be pushing Congress to act on the 1201 study to encourage them to look at it critically of what the problems of the DMCA are. Obviously, they don't have to just look at what the Copyright Office has compiled for them. Congress can take other information. They're the research branch of the government. So that's one item that I've been working on a whole bunch as part of the work that we do in handling issues with the government. This is another big one that I've been working on for several years at this point. You've probably heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership before, and if you haven't, I hope you'll listen here today, because it's a big deal. TPP, it's an international agreement. It's allegedly about trade. It's supposed to be like, we're going to cut our tariffs, and you guys cut your tariffs, and we'll all trade and be nice at everything. For TPP, there's plenty of reasons that people oppose TPP aside from the ones that I'm going to talk about. But for us, the ones that we're focused on are the ones that affect software freedom. A lot of the other groups that we work with on TPP have nothing to do with software. They're trade associations or labor unions or environmentalists. So lots of people oppose it for different reasons, but we oppose it because of the software freedoms issue. And that's because it's allegedly a trade agreement, but it's very much not. It covers a whole lot of other stuff. In particular, it spreads all that stuff I was telling you about how terrible the DMCA is. The TPP wants to have that not just in America, but also in Japan and Canada and all the other TPP signatory countries.
We're doing the same with Europe.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the best thing is that, so TPP is, there's 12 members in that. And then for Europe, we have TTIP. And there's a couple other ones. There's CISA and TISA that all have kind of the same set of regulations, that they're all happening in this massive net of different countries all working together to end up with the same laws, and they're all pretty terrible laws that are involved here. So yeah, the worst aspects of the DMCA, what I just went through saying that we're trying to stop here at home, they're trying to enshrine it into a trade agreement, which for some reason is actually more powerful than law, because once we are a member of a trade agreement, we can't even change it locally because, this trade agreement lasts for 40 years or whatever. We have to stick with it. What was the question?
That's enshrined in the U.S. Constitution.
Yes, it is. Treaties are on top. But for us, it's a pretty terrible situation because it's very difficult to organize globally opposition to these type of things. It makes it more difficult because, in 10 years' time when people finally start realizing, oh, God, this stuff is actually really terrible, we should have opposed it 10 years ago, it doesn't matter because you've got the trade agreement stuck there. So DMCA would be extended. Perpetual copyright, it's got an extension in there. I mean, you knew it had to be coming up, right? Because Mickey Mouse is going to be in the public domain in a year now. So with TPP, we will get another extension on our term of copyright. One of the nastiest parts, and people who've dealt with international trade agreements in other areas have felt the pain of these supranational investor state dispute settlement courts. What these are courts that are outside of any particular government, where a company that feels that their rights or profits are being threatened by a particular law or policy in abrogation of the trade agreement can go and sue the government of that country to stop that policy. So even though people in the country are like, we really want to change this law, or we want to raise the tax rate or do something like this, these courts give companies the power to go and sue the government to prevent that from happening. For the U.S., it can be a problem, but really it's a bigger problem for smaller countries because there are many countries in the world that have far less resources than large multinational corporations. So it can be very damaging for those countries in being able to, control their own democracy. But what TPP does is it spreads those dispute settlement things into our sphere. So people who are like, yeah, exactly. It continues the threat of software patents. A lot of people actually panicked when we got some leaks of the text of TPP that it was actually going to mandate software patents. It's not 100% clear, but it definitely is creating a framework where software patents exist. And the problem is that what I was just talking about with the these supranational courts is that they can go and say, hey, look, everybody else in TPP has software patents that extend for this long. We should get the same rights here as we have over there because you're all members of TPP. And so it can actually be, these courts can be used to push anything where there's any lack of clarity in the underlying treaty itself. There was also some confusing requirements about stating that governments could not require release of source code as part of their government contracts, which for a lot of people they said, okay, well, what does that mean? Does it mean you can't provide GPL software to the governments? It's not exactly clear what's going on with that. I think it's probably not, since the government at the same time is now doing their new source requirements on releasing 20% of their code freely. But it's another one of those things where it's like, okay, it's kind of a confusing aspect of the treaty, and we won't know how it actually works until it gets decided in these supranational courts, and it probably won't go in our favor if that's the way it gets decided. Yeah, so we talked about before, there's a whole bunch of other trade agreements that are doing the exact same things as TPP that are affecting countries all around the world. It's really ensnaring pretty much everybody. So the terrible things about these negotiations... Yes?
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to another topic. I was just wondering if your position is that trade agreements are bad, or simply that they should not have software patents and DMCA.
So definitely for us on TPP, we want all the stuff related to software freedom to be gone. This slide, I'm actually talking about why trade agreements in general are kind of anti-democratic in the way that they've been processed. When we're talking about TPP. Yeah, so the way that they're handled right now is that the trade agreements, they're not negotiated in public. We only knew about what TPP was saying over the past couple of years due to leaks of the text. So, I was talking about the ambiguity before where, having to go to these international courts, there's no way to really discern what the background or intent of the actual trade agreement is because we didn't really have access to the process. My predecessor at the FSF actually got to go to a roundtable meeting at TPP where it's supposed to be like, oh, we're going to bring in the software people and blah, blah, blah. But really they just used it as an opportunity to be like, look, we've got the people here, but we're not actually involving them in any meaningful way. And so they just kind of used it as a cover for being like, oh, the FSF is here, so what we're doing is okay. You can really contrast it to how the GPL v3 was drafted, where everything was done in public. You can go, even now, you can check out the archive of people commenting on the different drafts and the different rounds. I think the people behind TPP could really learn a lot from the way that we handled drafting the GPL v3. So, yeah, these trade agreements are done in a secret fashion. It's very nasty and anti-democratic, and it could have a whole bunch of terrible consequences for software freedom in particular.
On that, do you have any recommendation other than continuing to encourage representatives to?
Well, there's some stuff. I'm gonna get to some of the work that we've done on it and some of the work that we're going to continue to do on these things. It is a very difficult position because, particularly here in Washington, it doesn't seem that our representatives are very receptive to what we have to say about TPP. Trade Promotion Authority. You may have heard about this last summer. This was the big fight. It was the first major battle in the TPP, stopping TPP battle. So Trade Promotion Authority was the idea that once we have the agreement, then Congress will have to vote yes or no on it. They won't be able to amend it or do anything that they would normally be involved in a treaty, like saying no to certain parts of it and trying to negotiate it. It essentially hands over their authority to the president to just say, we're going to sign it, I've negotiated it, now say yes or no to it. So now, with TPP, the only thing they can do is vote yes or no. So the biggest thing that we did at that time was we were trying to stop fast-track authority. We wanted to make it to sort of move the end point for when we had a chance to be involved in the discussion further back. We worked together with a whole bunch of other groups like Fight for the Future and EFF, calling for people signing petitions, letter writing campaigns. It ended up not being enough, and TPP, Trade Promotion Authority, got pushed through. The the doubly unfortunate thing is that wasn't just a battle for TPP, because Trade Promotion Authority extends further into the future, so it also is going to apply for the next, all that whole batch of alphabet soup of other trade agreements that are coming down the pipeline. It's very unfortunate got to that point. So as I said, we worked with a lot of other groups. Fire for the Future and EFF are groups that work with digital rights type stuff. But there's a bunch of other groups involved in the sort of the coalition that we're working together with on this stuff. And like I said, they're environmentalists and labor organizations. We worked with EFF to promote a rally in D.C. back in November, getting people together to create materials and like graphics and things and websites for working on fighting back against TPP, locally as well as around the globe, as well as an in-person rally in D.C. We're working with other organizations on petitions and letter writing campaigns. We have put together like a briefer on TPP and other trade agreements. It's at fsf.org/tradingfreedom. So it's just a portal of information. So if you haven't heard of TPP before and you want to go learn more about what the heck's going on, you want to see all the different 30 articles I've written about this stupid thing, you can go get all that information in one spot. But this is a long-term battle. That it's going to have to be something that's done globally. It's definitely not something that Josh and I at the FSF, us two guys, can do alone. We obviously work with other groups, but we need lots of people involved in this fight. It looks possible that if Japan doesn't pass TPP in their country, that it might fall apart. So if you know people in Japan, now's the time to get them rallied together. So those are the two big ones. I've been working on those for years and years at this point. But there's been some smaller ones that maybe are possibly a little bit more hopeful in our success rate. The Department of Education recently updated the regulations. They don't want people to take government money, Department of Education grants, and then make proprietary software out of the stuff. So it's actually a really great update to the rules. They just wanted to say, hey, if you get federal funding through the Department of Education, you're going to have to make your software free software. And so we were actually very happy with that. There were some small tweaks that we wanted. We wanted to make sure that the language that they were saying made sure that the software actually was free. And so, but again, they're still using regulations.gov. They got the proprietary JavaScript. It's a big pain in the butt. So for that, we mostly, we provided our comment. We got co-signers and other people to submit comments that they wanted to have and bundled it all together and shipped it off to them. So we helped the community to communicate directly with the Department of Education. The full study results of that request for comments hasn't been completed, but we're very hopeful and we think it's going to turn out great. So this last one is another one that we've been doing some work on, but maybe not quite as happy as the Department of Ed. It's that FCC is moving to lock down all wireless devices. FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, so they're in charge of Wi-Fi spectrum, and they don't want people modifying devices to be able to change the radio spectrum into something that you're not permitted into. So like the EPA, they've come across this brilliant idea that we'll just make it so that when people get these devices, they can't modify them. On top of just having the rule saying, hey, don't modify it to do this certain thing, they want to make it so that you can't modify your wireless devices whatsoever. So Josh Gay, my associate, actually met with FCC officials because he thought initially that couldn't possibly be what they really intended with this stuff. And the answer was, no, yes, that is exactly what we intend. And we just want them to just lock down these devices and make it difficult for people to be able to break this other law. So along with that, we helped form a coalition called the Save Wi-Fi organization, which is pushing to fight back against these regulations. Helped along with this group to submit over 3,000 comments in opposition to these new regulations. That's still very much an ongoing discussion. I think there's some people here today who have good thoughts on that as well. But so, I spent 45 minutes talking about the work that we've done. You may have noticed that for a lot of it, it's a difficult slog. It's a lot of work for progress that is very, very piecemeal won. As I said before at the start, it's just me and Josh Gay at the FSF. We have volunteers, we have community members, but if it's just us, then nothing's going to happen. No one at the government's going to listen to Josh Gay and I. We're just two guys. We need lots of people involved. So down at the booth downstairs, we have a whole sheet of different ways you can volunteer, but if these types of issues are things that you're particularly jazzed about, some things you can help out with is the free JavaScript campaign. One of our big action items that's been there for the past several years is to get regulations.gov to stop using proprietary JavaScript. If you want to help out in that and also help out freeing JavaScript in other areas, whether it's your local community website or a government in another country that's using proprietary JavaScript to fend off people in the way. We need obviously more people joining the chorus on any action item that we're doing. I said we had 1,200 co-signers on that DMCA update study. 1,200 is great. I'm very happy to get 1,200 people to join us. But the government kind of they have their own petition website where they set a minimum of like 50,000 before they will even answer those questions there. Now, the comment system that we go through, they have to answer things even if there's fewer people. But the more people that we can get to join in on the movement, it's going to make a huge difference. So sharing our work with other people and keeping up to date with the type of work that we're doing is another big way you can help out on these issues. Another big thing you may have noticed is that all those things, except for maybe TPP a bit, were very U.S. localized. It's very difficult to keep up with regulations and things happening in governments all around the world, especially just for the two of us. So we need help with people who are familiar, whether they live in another country or are just familiar with the laws and what's going on there, to help us to bring things to our attention, but also to organize locally about the issues that are affecting them in the software freedom area. For that, we have our LibrePlanet.org local organizing site. It's a place where you can get together with other people in your local community and organize for software freedom. So I definitely recommend you get on board with all that. And that is all I had for you guys today. That's a whole bunch of stuff that we did. But I would be glad to take questions for the next 10 minutes or so. Anybody? No? Anybody?
I think it's a great presentation. As a matter of fact, your title of the talk didn't quite indicate just how deep some of the subjects were going to be.
Oh.
I think my only dispute is that when you're talking about organizations such as the federal government, which clearly do not respond to your petitions, and they're not democratic institutions,
Yep.
isn't the trick more to find out what is it that they have been responding to, and then be able to derail it at that end? Because I'm sure that just having thousands and thousands of petitions isn't going to mean squat for them whatsoever. There's clearly other entities back there that have a foot in the door. They don't have a foot in the door. They own the process.
Yeah.
And so you're basically going through the charade of democracy, whereas in fact, I can tell you in advance what the result is going to be. So first find out what interests are really being served by this and how they manage to maintain them. The gentleman got away, we talked about the Constitution. Right. It's absolutely correct, because this issue was up in 1789, and people were saying at the time, the anti-federalists were saying, you don't want to adopt this Constitution, because, my God, you're going to have the Senate, of all things, which at that time was not even elected, was going to be adopting international trade agreements, which are going to override legislation that the citizens have enacted. How could you do this? And the response was, well, we would never do that.
Yeah.
Let me add a corollary to what you're saying, and I think I can drive this down and give you something you can find. During the Prohibition era, heading straight on at banning alcohol wasn't successful because the government got a third of its revenue from alcohol sales. So what they did instead is they diverted themselves and created the income tax amendment. So that's a constitutional amendment. So people are like, how in the hell did they even get a constitutional amendment? That's why. Because some people were so focused on outlawing alcohol, they realized the one big giant thing in the way was to do that. So I think what you're saying, and I'm definitely curious too, is are you focusing on the wrong thing? Shouldn't you be focusing on the one wedge that's preventing them from listening to you? Or maybe a series of them?
Are you saying we shouldn't be focused on the proprietary JavaScript issue?
You may be focusing at the obvious target when the real movement will happen when you focus at the non-obvious target.
What would be the non-obvious?
That's not for me
Yeah,
to decide.
for you to
I
decide.
don't know the answer to that question,
Yeah.
but I'm saying
World government?
it's a jujitsu move where you use their momentum against you instead of going straight at the front.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories. That's bullshit. Okay, let's stay real here. Okay?
Yeah.
Focus on what the objections are in the person's mind. Senator Maria Cantwell, when she reads your comment and dismisses it because that's your job to figure out.
Yeah. So the local senators here, I think, just are very much involved with organizations that are kind of behind the TPP negotiating stuff. Obviously, we're not going to get anywhere near
Yeah, but
that
let's not
level
get
of
cynical.
relationship.
Let's say that there is a thing there, and if you can figure out what that wedge is, it's keeping the door open and causing you to ignore your point, heading straight on, open JavaScript, keep the Wi-Fi access available, modifiable.
Mm-hmm.
You're eventually going to turn the tide a lot more efficiently than hitting straight on at this brick wall. Just like we don't try to decrypt, right? We try to go around through a side channel.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities for that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that FSF, as like an educational nonprofit, is probably the ones to do that. Maybe we're definitely the people who are trying to publicly put together ideas in the mind of the government and in the public of what software freedom means and what the right way to go about it. I definitely think that there's probably other ways of conniving that kind of stuff, but that's probably not the FSF that does that.
I think we live in a consumer driven society and people don't spend and buy goods as advertising.
Yeah.
And so millions of people just don't give a
No, that's our biggest challenge, really. Like in terms of, I'm probably not as cynical as some of the other people. I do think that if enough people get together on an issue, that even the government, even if when someone has their ear, they eventually have to do something about it. But it takes a very massive movement of people. I mean, obviously, when you look at like the Department of Education item that I talked about, that was not something that was like a mass appeal type thing. That was somebody doing this sort of just continued conversation with an agency for a very long time to make that initial regulation come out. And so, I mean, the thing is, you don't need everybody for a movement to succeed at something. You need, I think someone said something like 5% of the population that is dedicated to actually making it happen. If you get that amount of people, that's enough to really do some damage. We're nowhere near that amount when it comes to software freedom. If you came by the table earlier, you may have heard me ask, do you know about free software? Because that's usually what I ask at conferences, because most people don't. Even the more popular term that other people use, open source, like even at OSCON, which is nominally the open source convention, people don't know what even that term is, and that's supposed to, that's the business term that people have been punching and everything. So getting through to that point is very, very difficult. Most people don't care. We don't have to get every person to care. It would be great if we could, but we need to get the people who do care but just don't know that they care to know that they do.
When you go to the FCC and you tell them don't prevent people from modifying devices that are wireless, you give them an alternative because their mission is important. I mean, they're regulating the airwaves, and it's important that people can't interfere with each other.
Yeah. Well, so the thing is that obviously wireless technology has existed for a long time, and their ability to enforce their laws, their regulations, I don't really understand why all of a sudden they have a need to use DRM to do it. Traditionally, the way laws work is they don't try to alter the physical nature of the universe. They just try and say, this is what's not allowed, and don't do it. And if you do it, then we'll come and get you. But when you have DRM-enabled laws, that's what they want to do, is they want to make it so that in their minds, it will be physically impossible to break the law instead, which is crazy. I mean, there's a really great book by Lawrence Lessig called Code, in an updated version, Code 2.0, that essentially goes over this idea that when it comes to software, we have the ability to kind of remake reality of the way things are. We don't have to rely on laws and regulations because you can just make it just, technically impossible to do the things that you don't want to happen. And so when we talk about the government using DRM to enforce their laws, that's a very scary reality of what, the control that they can do. You can think of things like, you could have barriers that are software enabled that track people that, okay, well, you can't go from this area to this area because you're restricted, things like that. All kinds of very nasty stuff once they start going down that road of using DRM to change the nature of what's possible as opposed to using laws to encourage people to change their behavior.
Sticking with the FCC angle here, has anyone that we know of done any looking at tracing the money? Who's funding it?
Who's funding it? I'm not sure because I think a lot of the people who actually make these devices kind of don't like the regulations. From at least their public statements, they're all like, this is really annoying. This is just government bureaucracy getting in our way. So, yeah, it might just be that the FCC is like, oh, hey, this DRM stuff the EPA and the Copyright Office have been dinking around with, just tell people you got to make it a certain way, and then, they won't be able to break the rules, and then we won't have to do any work, and we can sit back and drink pina coladas. Well,
I went to the talk this morning on encryption, and, of course,
yeah.
connection is there. And in particular, one of the comments that struck me most was the notion that law enforcement used to have to get people to go out and hunt down the criminals.
Yeah.
But now they can sit by their computer and get the criminals much less expensively. And as an amateur radio operator for years, like if I did something illegal, I knew that there was FCC people out there looking around. And it's the same principle, I believe, which is that if they can save themselves a bunch of money and just lock it down in the beginning. And so I really like the comments that it's like, follow the money.
Yeah.
And
I guess the money is in the agency itself. Yeah. They've realized, oh, man, we can really, cut the budget or spend the budget on something else that we want to do if we do it.
Which is scary, but we, the people, presumably, in the fantasy of those that are totally cynical, that believe that we are people, that we should presumably be able to say, hey, we want to fund the Department of Education and have that funding go to open, free software.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really with the Department of Ed one, that was definitely, we weren't the people leading up to the regulation getting proposed, but other groups were working on that, doing, talking to them and everything. It's like, and they were not big, nasty companies. They were regular groups kind of like us. And so it's definitely possible that, we could just keep that dialogue open. With the Copyright Office, it's very frustrating butting heads with them about this type of stuff. But it's also kind of good because they know who we are at this point. They know because we email them all the time. They're like, oh, it's these guys again with the JavaScript. What the heck is JavaScript anyway? But, yeah, opening that dialogue, I think, is an important part. Obviously, there's people who have much faster access to getting that kind of dialogue going. But I still think that the normal public avenues that we're all entitled to as citizens should still be used as well. Yes. Yeah, that's one of the big things that people push for exemptions for is that I'm a security researcher and I need to be able to crack this thing so I can figure out, what its actual vulnerabilities are, because otherwise you can't.
But a lot of that just get stalled, or there's a lot of that happen, and then they just kind of go for it anyways and get stuck with something that they can't really publish, that they can't get.
So security, some of the exemptions relate to security research. Like definitely some of those have been passed in the past and re-upped. For some don't, and then you don't get to do the work that you want to do, or at least not publicly. And that's the unfortunate reality of a system where you have to every year, every 3 years. It's actually really sad. When I started working on that issue, I was writing because in the previous exemptions period, they said you couldn't unlock you couldn't jailbreak your phone anymore, or carrier unlock your phone. So you lost the exemption to be able to switch your phone from one carrier to another, which involves cracking the DRM on the system. And so there was a big uproar and cry, and I was pushing to get it overturned and did a petition and everything. And that actually was successful. That was a few years ago, so I don't talk about it as much. But Congress came together and said, "Hey, wow, this is stupid. People should be able to switch their thing." So, like 6 months before the next round of exemptions came up, they passed a law saying, "Yeah, you get to carrier unlock your phones." But then, obviously, that was 6 months before the next round of the exemptions, and we had to go through and do the exemptions again for that exact same thing that we just, spent 3 years working a bill through Congress to get it to come out. Yes.
This is a sort of kind of question, but I mean, in your line of work, do you ever feel like the government officials that you're working with have mental models of computers and software that they can't appreciate what you're saying because their mental models don't allow for the notion of source code being proprietary or open source or it's a waiting game for younger people to get in office? Or
I don't know if it's not necessarily young or old people, but you're definitely right that when you're talking to these people, like I was saying with standing at the table, most people don't know what free software is or what the underlying ideas are, and so having that initial conversation, you have to get through that conversation to have the conversation about the actual issue that you want to have, and that's definitely a part of the process of being involved in these type of public discussions with the government about what the proper policies and everything are. So I'm actually out of time now. So
So guys,
the hallway's kind of blocked.